I'm Dana Russell with Kokopelli Real Estate and Property Management, and this is the Kokopelli Connection, where we discuss the history, happenings, and lifestyle of Western Colorado. On this episode of the Kokopelli Connection, we talked with Cody Kennedy, who is running for City Council re-election for District A. We discussed Cody's campaign, the homeless population, and the issues that surround the resource center. We discussed safety concerns of 4th and 5th Street, along with an update on 7th Street, and the growth and development within the city of Grand Junction. So let's jump into it. So Cody, tell us a little bit about you. What made you run for city council? Where are you from? Just give us a little bit of your background.
Great. So again, my name is Cody Kennedy, running for Grand Junction City Council, District A, and I'm currently the representative for District A on City Council. I've lived in Grand Junction 25 years. The majority of that I spent working for the Grand Junction Police Department. I worked as a police officer, with most of my career being spent as a detective. That was an amazing way to really learn about our city and to fall in love with serving our city, which is what I did, which is ultimately why I ran for city council. I retired after 17 years in 2022 and decided that I wasn't done serving Grand Junction. After having some time to reflect on where I was, an opening came up for my district as Rick Taggart was elected to a state level representative position.
Yep.
And I ran, and it was the perfect thing for me. So one of the reasons I did retire, and I think we'll probably talk about that today, is real estate and working on my own real estate business. And that, well, it gave me a lot of flexibility. I had been doing a lot of that work while I was working 40 to 50 hours a week for almost 2 decades. So I had some additional time on my hands that I thought I could do something good for Grand Junction.
Okay. How's your election campaign going at the moment?
Great.
Yeah.
It's great. I'm having a lot of opportunities to talk with people like yourselves, talk about what's important to Grand Junction, asking those questions every day. I was out knocking on doors in my neighborhood today and introduced myself to some people I didn't know and talking to them about what matters to them about Grand Junction. What is their main concern about the city? And do they know an election's coming up? Because believe it or not, Grand Junction's municipal elections have really, really bad turnouts.
Yes.
We have, let's say there's 70,000 people in the city of Grand Junction. We have roughly 44,800 registered voters. In the election when I was elected 2 years ago, we had about 17,000 people vote. That's not a lot.
No.
It's not a lot. And I would argue that the closer an election is to your front door, the more important it is to your life.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
So I really try to get that message out there to say, hey, vote.
Yeah.
Vote. Like, care about your community. It doesn't take long. Learn about the candidates, find out if they represent your values, and vote.
So we actually talked about the election this morning at Independent Brokers with the elections being moved from April to November. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm so hopeful that we do that. I'm so hopeful. It'll be good for Grand Junction in a few different ways. One, it saves us money.
Yeah.
Significantly. Two, and more importantly, is that I believe it'll greatly increase our voter turnout. So that's very important. One of the potential downsides that I've heard talked about is that when we have an issue, the City of Grand Junction has a ballot issue that we really want people to pay attention to, there's a chance that people get voter fatigue on a big ballot with a lot of issues on it.
Yeah.
That they just, they lose patience and they just start checking that no box going down. And I understand that. But in order to get a lot of people to engage with that voting process, and that's that representative, democracy that we need to have people voting in, that's what we need to do. So I'm very hopeful that message gets out to the voters and they support it widely. I think that everybody I'm talking to is supportive of it. I really haven't found anybody that's negative about that particular ballot issue. Now the other one, There is a little negative feedback. Do you know about the other ballot issue?
No.
Okay. So not to change the subject.
No,
on
that's
you,
okay.
But the other ballot issue is giving city council members a raise.
Yes.
Right. And that's a tough ask.
It is.
And even the way we've worded it, nobody that's currently sitting would automatically get it. There's only 2 council members that would ever be eligible, and that they would have to run for re-election to get that. I personally would never see that raise. I'm supportive of it in that it's tough to get people to do what I'm doing for $500 a month. Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
I've also heard it argued, well, hey, this is like a volunteer job. That's what you're doing, right? And that's the way I feel about it. Like, I donate the proceeds from my council pay stipend, that $500 a month, back to a nonprofit. I have, I put a lot more time into this job than probably a lot of people would, but I think that's an important way to give. But we need to encourage good people to run for council. And not everybody can afford it or have that flexibility.
Right. Yeah.
So
with, where was my thought going? With the change in election, you kind of mentioned it, but can you go a little more into detail? Do you feel like some of the issues that would be focused on in an April election would get lost in a November election? That they'll just get muddled with federal and state issues, with school board issues, or do you think that they would
There's the potential for that. However, there's also the need for the work to be done for those that want to pass a ballot initiative, to really get out and communicate with people, to spend the time making sure that they understand the issues, right? That if we are wanting to, in this case, we'll use the example of give council members a raise, we have to make the case, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of dissatisfaction right now with city council, and I think 4th and 5th Street is a good example of that. I mean, people are mad.
Right.
And they're like, you're asking for a raise and you did this? Like, I get that. I absolutely get that. So it's like, how do you make sure that you're effectively communicating it to the folks that are going to vote? So in a crowded ballot, if you've done your work, then people will come out and they'll find that issue and they'll vote on it if it matters to them. And if you're putting it on the ballot, it should matter to people.
So with city council getting a raise, I feel like there would have to be trust within city council members. How do you feel the trust is represented in the community at the moment towards city council, and how could you change that atmosphere?
So I feel like there is a lot of mistrust right now. I think that people don't feel like there's a ton of transparency. I think some decisions have been made that could have been there could have been steps that were taken to make sure that the community voice was heard and that we were engaging with people. And I think the Resource Center is another good example of that. That was done as a little bit of in my opinion, a knee-jerk reaction to Whitman Park closing, which we weren't told about, except for a few days before that it was going to happen. It wasn't like, this is a question.
That's interesting.
Our former city manager, which it's operational. And it's worthwhile for me to just kind of put a pin in the conversation right here to say, city council's role is policy and budget. We oversee the city manager, city attorney, and the judge. So it's completely within the city manager's purview to say, we're closing this park. In the case of Whitman, they closed it and said, oh, this is for activation. But here we are a year and a half later, the fence around it. That doesn't say activation to me, right? And I wrote an article at the time saying that I don't believe it's about activation, neither should you. This is about safety. As a police officer, I could tell you, like, here's the crimes that were happening. Somebody had just been stabbed in the park. We had a lot of, narcotics activity. We had, fights and all kinds of bad things happening. Officers being assaulted, officers being bit by dogs. And it's like, let's shut that darn park. That's terrible. That shouldn't happen. In hindsight, it might also be involved with some discussions with the DDA and some other development down there, and saying we can't have this right here. So I don't know. It's tough. It's not something that when you think about the people that are homeless in our community, you can't just push that problem around, right? You need to actually come up with solutions that are actual solutions, not just, oh, we're going to shut the park.
Right. So. Yeah. Well, to stay on that topic, tell us a little bit your thoughts on the resource center. It's being moved over to North Avenue, correct?
Maybe.
Yep.
Well, maybe.
That's at least the rumor.
So it's more than a rumor. So let me dive into that a little bit. So I'll parse out kind of where we're at with the North Avenue and the building, and then I'll come back to its movement.
Perfect.
So we've had discussions about moving it to North Avenue insofar as we've had executive session to look at a real estate transaction. So we aren't executive sessions are supposed to be limited in scope. Like, we can't be talking about policy in those meetings. We need to be talking specifically about things like a real estate transaction or an employee related issue. So that's about transparency, right? That there are things that can be protected, and if we have conversation beyond that, it needs to be out in public purview. But because we were saying, oh, well, we're shutting this down, we need to come up with something. So, what are our options? And we started, well, are there buildings we could lease? Are there buildings we could buy? And of the half dozen options that were brought to us, this one on North Avenue, in proximity to the Homeward Bound shelter, was probably the best option. Backing up a step, we should probably be asking, well, is this the proper role for government? Is this what we want to do? Is this what the city wants us to do? And that's a conversation we kind of skipped over because of the way this process works with executive session and real estate. So all of a sudden we're just charging right into a real estate transaction. So that's where we need to pause and come back. It would absolutely have come back to council anyway, to a public conversation. What would have happened, though, in this case, and I think this is where people are getting a little angry and like the city wasn't transparent. If the city could get a contract in place, due diligence is done, the way our real estate contracts are written, council still has the final say up until, we have the approved contract, both sides are signing. You still have to get council's okay. And if they say no, then it doesn't go through. So that's where we actually say, there will be a conversation. We're just trying to get this contract in place. Even though that really feels like getting the cart in front of the horse. Well, you're buying it and then you're going to have the conversation. No, we're not buying it. We're putting together a contract to say, is this going to happen? Now, as the due diligence is done, as the inspections are done, we may find out that there is a lot of deferred maintenance on the property. And that might be something that makes it cost prohibitive. So that'll become part of the conversation. But I think at this point, our community is demanding that we have an open and transparent conversation about not only the location of the resource center, but what's the city's role? Are we going to continue to do this? Is this something that we are going to do as a community? Do the voters want us to buy a brick and mortar building and provide a resource center? Or is that the role of a charity within our community that we can maybe help support, but not necessarily make that our role? Because it was initially funded with ARPA dollars. Yes. Which feels a lot like money from the sky, even though it's really taxpayer dollars. Yes. And we thought that was a good use for kind of fixing that problem that we had with all of a sudden Whitman Park getting slammed shut without any engagement or process. In hindsight, I don't think I would have done it quite the way we did it if I could be, if it was up to me. It's not. But going forward, we just need to make sure we're thoughtful about that process and making sure we're engaging with the community and saying, okay, what's our role? And what are we going to do here for the good of Grand Junction?
How successful do you feel the resource center has been with the homeless population, with bringing people off the streets, helping them, not providing jobs, but helping them get jobs, getting them off the street? Right. What's the success with that?
It all comes down to metrics, right? How do you measure success? If you talk to Homeward Bound and talk about the amount of food that's been provided to our community, it's substantial. And several months ago, I think that number was over 100,000 pounds of food that had been distributed to.
That's a lot of food.
Yeah, I think 10,000 families I'm not positive on the numbers, but it was over 100,000 pounds of food. And I get, and great, but is that our metric? Because what you touched on, how are we helping people, right? That's what I'm about, is to not necessarily just make it really easy to stay at one level, but how do we get people to a better place? And it's a free country. People don't have to go to that better place. They can stay exactly where they're at. They have that right. But for what we're doing as a community, and what I see that we should be doing, is trying to, if people are in a bad place and they need help, especially if it has to do with mental health or addiction, and they are wanting to improve their lives, if there's a role that we can play to help with that, great. So that's tough. I know Homeward Bound has some metrics as far as the people they've actually housed or got into some more consistent housing, and by housed I mean into their shelter. They also have Pathways Village and some other some options like that as well. So the hope, though, as we look at these situations and these types of resources, we think, well, what are we accomplishing? And are we just perpetuating a situation, making it really easy to stay at this level because, hey, the food's there, everything's there, it's really easy.
Right.
Versus what's our metric? How are we really helping people up and out?
And sometimes I think it's easy to see a big number and see, oh, you're helping so many people, that's a great success, when really those numbers should be low, because that means those people are helping themselves. Yeah. And so I know with Kids Aid, they're growing and growing and growing, which is great that they're growing, but they see it as the same thing. They want those numbers to be low because that means people are successful on their own. Exactly that.
And I know it's one of the other things that makes it a little hard to measure success there is that we've had a fairly significant influx of people coming to the Grand Valley that are close to homeless or living in their car, and which counts as homeless. And that is an ever-changing number for us. I spoke with the Macy County Public Health Director some time ago, and it was interesting to me to learn that while we aren't seeing necessarily migrants in our community, we are seeing a push of people that might be the longer-term unhoused population from Denver that are maybe having their resources overrun a bit, be it that food banks or shelters, that type of thing. And so now they're moving away from Denver somewhat, because Denver became that sanctuary city, had a lot of pressure on those resources, so naturally people go elsewhere, and not just into the Front Range, but Grand Junction. We're a great place to live. I mean, this is not only just a wonderful community in general, we're very giving, the climate's fairly mild, so this is where people come.
With the closing of Whitman Park, and you mentioned there was a lot of officers that were getting hurt or incidents, how has the crime been affected with the closing of Whitman Park and the addition of the Resource Center and then it closing again?
Right. So I have been a little bit maligned for some of my comments in there, but you can imagine as a retired police officer, I have a perspective. Yeah. And when I hear that in 3 days, officers that were looking for a subject with a $50,000 warrant for drug distribution, they were looking specifically at the Resource Center because that person was known to frequent there. And so they were set up watching that in unmarked cars, right? Cameras and binoculars and whatnot. And they get 50 violations, drug violations of open air meth use and fentanyl use in a matter of 3 days. That's concerning to me. And I know there's a picture, I just need to get my hands on it, but there's a picture of a mom walking by with her little girl's hand with a guy smoking a meth pipe, like arm's length away from her. And that's not the Grand Junction that I want to live in. No. That is not okay. I will fight against that. I will continue to fight against that. So that to me is something that we need to be at least honest about and not try to turn a blind eye and say, oh, everything is great. Look at all these people we're helping. Let's throw some more money. No, let's be honest about it and say, who are we really helping and what is this problem? So when I called that problem out, I still get a lot of hate for that. Right? And I get it. It's not the most savory thing to talk about, but I'm willing to talk about it. Yeah. Like I'm that guy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah. Discussions are good. Money doesn't always solve everything.
Right.
You have to talk about it.
Agreed.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit onto housing and development. Can you tell us kind of what the city's vision is for growth and development, how they see the city growing?
You know, it's interesting. The first thing when you say, hey, how do they? I think, who is they? Right?
Yeah.
So whether that's, city council or whether that's staff or whether that's, our broader community, I can share with you my vision for that and what I'm working towards. And I think some people share this vision, and I hope we can continue to work towards that. But I believe that economic growth is important to any community. You either grow or you die. I believe that we need housing. And when I talk about housing, we need housing at all levels, but we particularly need starter homes. Mm-hmm. And that's that everybody talks about small capital A or small A affordability. Yes, we need both. When I say capital A, I'm referring to subsidized housing, like the Housing Authority, for instance. Mm-hmm. But to actually provide homes that people can buy, that work in Grand Junction, that want to live in Grand Junction, and you guys are in the real estate business, I know that's the, not only is it the American dream, but it's how people get started. It's how
right.
people gain success and get some traction in life and get off of that perpetual situation sometimes when people are consistently renting and rents go up over the years and they're never quite getting ahead and maybe they're battling some debt. It's like if they can just get into that first house, life changes for them. And that's what I want to see, mm-hmm. more of that opportunity. And there are some things that need to happen that are outside of our control. For instance, the builder defect laws, as far as
yep.
Getting that changed so that we have more of these condo-style homes built that people get into at a lower price point. Mm-hmm. But if we could streamline our planning process, for our builders to be able to get homes through the process and get a subdivision out of the ground in more quickly than in a year, right? That makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So we bring those stocks online, which will bring the overall price down. And it baffles me that the people that are, seem to be cheering for affordable housing are some of the ones that are pushing these policies that are so anti-affordable housing. I just have a hard time wrapping my head around that. And I've been accused of being, just supporting developers because I'm trying to push fees down. And I'm like, tell me that you don't know anything about housing without telling me that you don't know anything about housing. Because literally those fees are just passed straight through
right,
to the buyer.
To the buyer. Yep.
That's just the way that works. A builder is going to build a house with a certain margin that they bought the ground at this price. They spent this much money in the development process, and they spend this much money on the actual structure. This mm-hmm. is what they paid their subs, and this is where they finally get to the finish point, and then this is their margin. So that's going to just continue to go up as right. the city layers on costs. And I do admit the city has costs. The price of everything has gone up. We need to be honest with ourselves about the impact of impact fees mm-hmm. instead of just always looking for the maximum permissible fee that
right.
we can get every time.
Right.
My opinion.
Just because you can charge it doesn't mean you necessarily should.
Yes. So one of the other things when you talk about the vision for housing, I grew up near Fort Collins in a little town, farming community. All the farms that I grew up on and around are now, covered up with houses, mm-hmm. right? All my friends' places, and it's kind of tough to see that, right? Where it's like these seas of homes. One of the things I think is smart about what Grand Junction is doing is adding some apartments to the mix and some other smart infill. I get that's not everybody's favorite. I right. know, like, wouldn't we all just like, a beautiful little 2-bedroom, 3-bath, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, white picket fence. That mm-hmm. yes, that's great. That doesn't work for everybody's lifestyle or budget. And when you have 100 units in a small area on a couple acres versus if those were single-family homes, it takes up a lot more space. So you get into mm-hmm. that sprawl.
Right.
So it's a matter of finding some balance there. Mm-hmm. And I think the city's done a fair job. Now, keep in mind, while we do have oversight on zoning, and I know you know this, but we have oversight on zoning. We can't tell developers what to build or what not to build. You know, I heard a comment recently during somebody else. I was watching somebody else be interviewed that's interested in city council, and they're talking about, we should just require developers to build twice as many affordable homes as the expensive homes, so that so we have more. It's like, okay, that's not the way this works. I mean, that's not the way it works.
Right.
I mean, at some point, the builders just don't build. They go outside the city limits. They go somewhere else. Or a lot of them that are they don't build because they need to. They're in a good spot. They're continuing their business forward to support their subcontractors, and that's they're the professionals. They know what to do. They'll just either not do it or they'll do it somewhere else.
Yeah. In terms of the impact fees, how that's being voted on tomorrow, correct?
Yeah.
How much are those proposed to go up? Do you know?
Well, there's a whole graph, right?
Yes.
That if I could
Yes.
pull that out, right, we could talk about like each individual area where it's being increased. But the way that I'm seeing it is that we're probably going to increase the cost of a single family home by like $8,000, right? So there's some substantial increases to things like hospitals, right, and other commercial type buildings, but without breaking it down into their exact categories, because we'll have that as we're up there voting on. We'll be looking at all that. To me, it's just a time to like pause. Like, seems like we are charging headlong into this, like just running towards increasing fees as much as possible, instead of saying, okay, well, hold on just a minute. Are there any other options? What ways could we do this that would have less of an impact on the cost of our housing in Grand Junction?
Yeah.
And that's all I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying let's not do it at all, but I'll vote no on the proposal as it is, because it doesn't make sense for people trying to own homes in Grand Junction.
Yeah.
So
how do you feel those impact fees will affect commercial buildings and other employers coming into the Grand Valley?
It discourages them.
Yeah.
It's not as bad. Our current situation isn't as bad as when they were trying to push forward a linkage fee. That was it was a fee that was going to be attached to commercial building that was to subsidize affordable housing, capital A, subsidized affordable housing in Grand Junction. And to me, that would have just been a disaster. I mean, you're just basically telling businesses, we don't want you here. You should go to Montrose. I hear they're open for business, right? So, I mean, that's honestly what we're saying, and it's just embarrassing. Like, that's like, are we really? Do we not believe in economic development? Do we not want businesses to come and thrive here? It feels to me like that's maybe what's going on, and I guess my position is that we need to look for other ways to carry some of that weight, and to see if there's some of that weight that we don't need to be carrying.
It seems with some of the building codes, especially in new construction, that are in place, do you feel as though some of those are a bit much, and we could help remove some of those to help reduce some of those building fees that are passed on to the buyer?
It isn't so much that the codes are too much. I mean, now we could really jump into our Ted's plan, right? Our transportation engineering design standards.
Yeah.
And so short answer is yes. But I think the longer answer is that a better solution, at least initially, would be to fix our planning department. There was a great conversation last night during our workshop about our planning department and the challenges they're facing. And it was really focused around trying to streamline it for the sake of affordable housing. That's kind of what justified this, to say, how do we get affordable housing online through, Proposition 123. But it spoke to the whole planning process and how it's suffered or how it's caused problems for developers. It doesn't matter whether you're building a subsidized apartment complex or or you're building, Habitat for Humanity's building a few homes, or if a developer is building a new subdivision full of starter homes on Orchard Mesa, whatever that is, that planning process is that nexus that they have to get through. And that's been a tough one. That's been a real tough one. And there are things I think that could be common sense that would really help us with some smart infill. For instance, and you might be familiar with this, but I get information about investment properties quite often. And some of these are perfect for lot splits, right? You go in and it's like, oh man, that would be a great lot split. Like this house could, like if I could buy this place and if I could get rent to cover for this, or we could fix this house and flip it, then we could subdivide this lot and we could sell the other side. But then you go to the city and the city says, oh, well, there is a beautiful, steel building on one corner of the property. You're going to have to tear that down because there's no primary residence on that side of the property. Huh. Interesting. Okay, we're going to throw money out the window because there will be at some point, but you literally got to tear it down in order to subdivide it.
Right.
Or we know there's no sidewalk out there. Someday there will be. So we want you to put 100 yards of sidewalk out here that you're going to pay for. Oh, by the way, it's got to be 6 feet wide, not 4 feet.
Yep.
And like the deal is so thin anyways, people don't realize how hard real estate is. They think that, oh, it's all this money, and it's just not.
No.
Right? It's a business like anything, and the margins are thin and challenging. And with
especially now.
With mortgage rates being what they are, right? And all these other challenges. So there sits that property, just stagnant. There's not a second home on that property. And there might not ever be because of city planning.
Right. Yeah.
So those are the things that I think that the people that I sit on the dais with that maybe haven't been around real estate don't understand. When they're pounding their fist on the table, and I'm exaggerating. Somebody's going to hear that. They're going to say I'm saying all these terrible things about them. But when they're taking a hard line on some of these things, or my comments around planning, that's what I base my comments on, is actual experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Switching gears a little bit to traffic and infrastructure, the very controversial topic of 4th and 5th Street.
Yeah.
Give us a little insight that you have on 4th and 5th Street.
Man, what a mistake. I really think that it was it was an unfortunate decision by the city. I think that we didn't do nearly enough community engagement. I think the city really misread the situation. They are trying to say that it's because of a number of crashes and it's all about safety, when the statistics that they're leaning on don't necessarily, in my opinion, support the changes that have been made. So if you're using just all the crash reports, right, you're not parsing out the data, you're not taking out the crash that maybe was somebody backing out of the post office that turned too soon and kind of backed into a car next to them, and you're calling that a crash, and you're trying to justify changing speeds in that area based on that, or a lot of those, that's misleading.
Yeah.
Right. And then putting the bike lane where they did, that hidden bike lane, that's a hot mess. Like that was a bad choice to begin with. And I can tell you, as a police officer, and where crashes happen, your right-hand turns where a bike, you're not only hiding the bike from the car, but also the car from the bike. Do you want people to get hurt? Is that the intention here? And for the record, I know this is being recorded. I get that wasn't our intention.
Right.
Please, somebody, if you get hit by a car, don't sue us. But it just was not well thought out in my mind. I've spent a lot of time. Obviously, I was trained in traffic investigation over the years at the police department. I've done a lot of crash investigations, but I've also talked to traffic engineers, and not just the ones at the city, right? State and federal level, where I learn about things like the safe systems approach, where you're actually separating different types, modalities of transportation in time and place. So you don't put cars right where bikes are going to be at the same time at the same place.
Yeah.
Right. That's not the idea, which is why it's not safe and why we have crashes with bikes and cars. And it seems like, as we drill down into it, it's like, why are we really doing this? And to me, it's because they want to make it less convenient for cars to be in our downtown area, right? You want to turn our downtown into, Denver or Boulder, right? Whether it's 16th Street Mall or Pearl Street, right? So it's this walking area and bikes, and that is great. I mean, that's what some people want. That's not what I see our needs for Grand Junction, especially from the public safety perspective.
Right.
One of the first things I did as I was talking to folks about 4th and 5th Street is to talk to the police and fire unions about it and say, hey, give it to me straight. What do you think about this? I had some ideas, but they did, and they said, this doesn't work. This just does not work. And yes, they made the lanes a little wider based on that. It still doesn't work. You don't have any place for vehicles to yield to. I can tell you.
And that was going to be my next question.
Right.
How is that working? Because it seems
Right.
like that.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
So I will tell you from being somebody that's driven with lights and sirens on, that while people are supposed to yield, sometimes people just freeze up, right? That's that where we have that fight, flight, or freeze response. A lot of people, if all of a sudden somebody's coming up fast behind them with lights and sirens, they hit the brakes and they hold on to their steering wheel. And when you have no room to go around them, and you have, cars that, like a bike lane and then parked cars and then one lane of traffic and then more parked cars, it just doesn't work. And especially when you're thinking like, this is a thoroughfare from Orchard Mesa to St. Mary's. Are we really going to do that?
Right.
Like, do we just want to shoot ourselves in the foot transportation-wise for our downtown Grand Junction? So, and I know there's some varying opinions on that, and I've gotten a lot of pushback on that. It is what it is. I'm going to be honest about it, right? I'll call it what it is. So
7th Street was another contender to be made into the same format. Where is the city at with that?
Oh, they're still pushing for it. They're saying, oh, we're just going to put the plan on. We're going to finish the plan. We'll just put it on the shelf. Yeah. Okay. They definitely have plans for 7th Street. So the plan is now to convert from Grand to North Avenue into a one lane, right? Possibly moving the median from the center, that beautiful median we have with the light poles.
Yep.
Like move that over to the side. And so you'd have one lane in each direction and then a protected bike lane. Now I will grant that a protected bike lane is better for bikes than bikes in traffic. But it's not a good solution.
No.
It's not what people in Grand Junction want. There's a few people that want it, and I've heard their very loud voices lots of times. But I think the majority of people just say, leave our 7th Street alone.
Yeah.
Please, just leave it alone.
Well, it's a main thoroughfare.
Yes,
and
a
it seems
historical
like
street, and yeah.
It seems like they're targeting main thoroughfares for police, fire, and hospitals, which does not make any sense.
Exactly that. When you think about, like, wait a minute, what are you doing with all these bike lanes? And you're going to do this all the way up in and around St. Mary's from South Avenue or from Ute and Pitkin all the way up to Patterson? I get that you want to be able to, pedal around town, and flow with traffic. Yes, great. We should be able to do that safely. However, when you are compromising safety and traffic flows, it's not good for our city. It
is very interesting that this was implemented in an area where it doesn't seem like there's that many bikes. I mean, it really, when you go downtown, yes, you'll see a few, but we're not a commuter city.
No, we're not. And we're Western Colorado, and that just doesn't work for a lot of people. We certainly have some commuters that are, that will ride their bikes everywhere. I have a fellow council member that does. That's not for everybody.
Right.
Some people are older, some people have different health situations, some people have kids. Some people don't want to.
Right.
Right? They should have the liberty to choose what their mode of transportation is. So that is striking to me as this is pushed forward. So that to me is something that we need to be making sure that we're taking our community's voice into consideration on that. And it's not just the transportation issues. There is significant decreases in downtown businesses. And I know that because I'm actually out there talking to the businesses. I just met with the new CEO of Hope West about 2 weeks ago, and she was telling me the significant decrease in retail sales that have happened at the Heirlooms store. And while the cities wouldn't put forward what the tax revenues are, if they ever do, if we get to that point, the data to make it accurate would have to be parsed out, right? So we're talking about restaurants, we're talking about retail. Dalby Windland, an accountant, is probably going to do the same amount of revenue they always do. You know, if you're an insurance broker or, you know, a bank, something like that, you're probably going to do the same amount of revenue that you always do, but restaurants and retail are getting hit super hard.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
4th and 5th Street businesses, how are they responding to bike lanes, and are they seeing a drop in business?
Yep. And not just a drop in business. One of the interesting things is, you know, you pop into the post office, right? And you're going to, you know, mail something. And next time you do that and you happen to be downtown, ask them what they think about 4th and 5th Street. They get excited. They are upset, right? It's, and they're like, our customers that have been down here forever and had a post office box come in here and they cancel their boxes. Because if they're older, they just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
It's unsafe. They got to walk across this bike lane where one of these e-bikes might be going by at 20 miles an hour, right? Or, you know, they don't feel like it's convenient to park. They don't know the parallel parking with traffic backing up behind them while they're trying to parallel park. And it's so frustrating for them. And when you go and you listen to people on 4th and 5th, you know, Trophy Case and, you know, heck, actually, just any place downtown. I mean, literally, there are, of the, you know, 100 businesses roughly that I talked to, I'd say there was 4 or 5 of them that were supportive. Most of them were not.
Yeah.
So.
So with running for this, I know that you're already involved in city council and have been for quite some time. Feeling that there is a lack of trust within the community and also a lack of communication. How do you feel you can change that? What do you plan on doing moving forward in city council should you be reelected? What are kind of your plans for this next term?
So one of the things that you realize once you've been on city council for a while is that it takes partnership to change anything, right? It's got to be me plus 3 to have a majority to do anything. And when you have kind of this political block, this group that votes the same way most of the time, it's tough to navigate that.
Yeah.
But what I will continue doing is being very, very transparent and very, very vocal and engaging with the community. Like if you ever look at my Cody for GJ Facebook page, like I've had in the last 28 days over 3,000 interactions. Like those are comments with me going back and forth with people. I've had over 90,000 views on my page in the last 30 days.
And you always offer to sit down and have coffee with people, correct?
I do coffee with Cody twice a week, right?
Okay.
So just come in and talk to me. Tell me what you want. And I've had people come in that are mad, right? It's not everybody just like, oh, you're doing a great job. It's like people, we have different opinions, right? Come tell me about it. It's fine. And honestly, and people that are like flaming me on Facebook, it's like, hey, you know, I respect that you have an opinion and I want to hear about it. But this being like this keyboard thing back and forth isn't productive.
No.
Why don't we meet up? Let's come down. I'll buy the coffee. Let's meet up. Not very many people take me up on that. But as far as what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue to be engaging with the community and be a voice for people and to say, I'm listening to the community and I'm interacting with them and I'm trying to be a representative.
Well, and I think the difference with that is you're willing to take action, whereas a lot of people aren't. They're just willing to talk about it, but it takes more than that if you want to see any type of change.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting. It's hard to get change at that city council level and see effective change. But that's one of the things that I encourage people to do. 1, vote. Make sure you vote. 2, really investigate the candidates and who's running. We have, you know, a lot of candidates in the pool right now, and it's a matter of saying really kind of understanding what their motivations are and who they are and kind of what their track record is if they're on council and if they're not, like what's important to them, what are they saying? So that's and I know there's some people out there that are trying to paint like a political block, and it's like, yep, you're absolutely right. Political blocks are bad for Grand Junction, and there is one in effect right now. So you're right. We should probably fix that. So.
And remind us again, April 8th is when ballots are due?
Yes. So the 17th of this month is so a couple of weeks away.
Coming up.
Ballots are going to be dropping. They're going to be going out. So right away. And then April 8th is the election day. Okay. So that is that critical time where people need to be like, don't let that ballot sit on your countertop.
Yes.
Like literally it comes. Please open it up, fill it out, get it back. Get it turned in. Voting's important. So I gave you the numbers. It's critical that people vote. This election's very, very. Every election's important, right?
Right.
Everybody,
Yes.
every election you've ever heard anybody, especially a candidate, man, this is the most important election ever, and it feels that way as a candidate because we're so vested in it. But it is important to the community.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you for your time today. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah.
And
Thanks for
hopefully
having me.
people get out and vote.
Yep, hope so
Yes.
too. Thank you.
Perfect.